Hello everyone, welcome to the new transcoding guide for Premiere Pro projects. Before we get started, let's go over the layout for this new series. It's going to be similar to the assistant editor series. There's going to be multiple episodes. So let's go over this layout. The first thing is we're going to be going over 4 methods of transcoding footage. The first is transcoding non-raw material with Media Encoder. And within this category, there's also media to be transcoded to a higher codec for finishing and footage to be transcoded to a lower codec strictly for offline, which is the typical case. The second is transcoding with the new Premiere proxy system. The third is transcoding red raw media. The fourth is transcoding other forms of raw media via DaVinci Resolve. So for each method I'll be showing you, I try to find the best approach for each format. So let's get started with method number 1, media encoder transcoding. Now, first, before we get started, is all 3 of these methods, or all 4 of these methods, must adhere to the same following rules. 1, the resolution or the aspect ratio must be scaled properly. So I see a lot of people that just take a bunch of footage that's 4K or 3.8K, and they basically just start making everything 1920 by 1080. ProRes 42LT files and be done with it. But if you have a file that is 4K resolution or 4096 by 2160, please understand that that is basically a 2K file doubled. It has the same aspect ratio as a 2K file. So you should be transcoding that to 2048 by 1080. If you have a UHD file, which is 3840 by 2160, you can transcode that to 1920 by 1080. Since they're both the same aspect ratio. You don't want to edit a project using HD proxies and then find out after a bunch of reframing that everything has to be moved around because it's actually 2K. There are a lot of resolution sizes nowadays, like the Arri Alexa 3.2K format, which might sound confusing, but again, 3.2K is actually a 16:9 aspect ratio, so it can be transcoded to 1920. And if you're confused about how to go about finding out what the aspect ratio is and proper downsizing, just stay tuned because I'll be showing you different methods of solving this throughout the video. The second rule, audio channels must stay intact. Again, you can't just queue stuff up for transcoding and select the audio channel as stereo. In Premiere, relinking to camera originals requires the number of audio channels to stay intact. If in Premiere a file has 2-channel mono, that's not the same thing as stereo. They're 2 separate types of layouts. The third rule, match the frame rate to the original. This one's pretty self-explanatory. If you make a proxy that has slow motion capabilities like 60 frames per second and you transcode it to 2398, you obviously lose that perk. So match the frame rate. So again, I'm sorry about all that information right up front, but I just want to establish those base rules first because they're going to be throughout all the videos. So let's not delay any further and let's get started. First, let's create a new Premiere project and put it in a place easy to find. If you're wondering why we're not just starting in Media Encoder, you'll see why in a minute. Okay, let's just name it Proxy Project. I'm going to browse it to a project folder. Now, this should be in a place that's easy to find for future reference. Click OK. Now we need to establish the metadata display. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make basically the project window really big. We don't really even need the timeline. We don't need the program window or the source monitor. We really just need this window here. So you can pretty much just max this out. So here's our metadata display. We right click in here and we go to metadata display and we're going to deselect everything basically. So if you expand this and click this, it's going to select everything. Click it again to deselect. Now we only need 3 main things for this. So let's select frame rate. Let's select audio info. And let's select video info. And then we are going to basically, what this is going to do is this is going to give us the frame rate, the audio layout, and the frame resolution based on those 3 rules that I mentioned before. So let's save this setting for in the future, and let's call it Transcode Essentials. Cool. Click OK, and now we've got our frame rate, video info, and audio info, which is great. Okay, so let's bring our footage in. I have some footage here from a music video shoot, from some real estate stuff, and from a short film, just a whole bunch of different formats. So we have a different uh, resolutions, frame rates, and stuff like that, hopefully. And what some people do is they import the entire footage route. I like to bring it in one camera at a time because I feel like sometimes the import process skips over some files when you do it from the root and you're selecting a whole bunch of different subfolders in there. So I just bring it in one at a time. It doesn't take very long and it sort of gives me some peace of mind. So I'm now just going to create a quick thing called footage. I'm going to bring all my footage into here. And let's open up the first folder. And let's see, we've got a whole bunch of footage that's 4096. And then we've got one that's 3840 by 2160. And also, this one is stereo, and these ones are 8 mono. So we've got a nice little variety here. Now, imagine you're working on something that is a little heavier. And let's just say there's like 50 folders or 50 files here. And there was a whole bunch that are 4096, and they were on like take 5, and all of a sudden they switch to 3840, and then they go back to 4096. You want to make sure that you don't skip over that by accident. So instead of organizing everything by name, I like to organize it by video info. That way, everything that is the same resolution stays together. Now, what I want to do is basically we want to select everything that is 4096 by 2160 just from ACAM because we don't need to go into BCAM or CCAM. We want to keep everything organized the same way. I'm going to hit Control M for export media. If you're on a Mac, it's Command M. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my export settings. So if you're on a Mac, I suggest you simply go with QuickTime and make the video codec ProRes 422 LT. And like I said before, the aspect ratio must scale properly. So this is 4096 footage that we have checked. So simply check the match source button. And by the way, I'm on a PC, so I'm just going to be doing GoPro Cineform. I'm going to keep the quality down to like 3 or something. And this is 4096, so I'm going to click match source. So that finds the footage's source resolution. It's going to do based on source. Then what we're going to do is we're going to uncheck the width/height and make sure this is still selected. Make sure it's not off like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to change this to, we're going to change the height line to 1080. And what it's going to do is it's automatically going to scale this down with the same aspect ratio. So you can see here, select to maintain the frame aspect ratio while resizing. We're going to get our standard 1080 and it's going to change our width to 2840. So when we clicked match source, it automatically got the field order, the frame rate, and the pixel aspect ratio. And you can do that based on source for all of these. So I know I said keep frame rate like in mind for when you're matching source, but it's like I said, it's pretty self-explanatory. If you had a bunch of footage that was 4096 and every single one of these was a different frame rate, this is going to catch it for you in Media Encoder. Not everything does. So again, I like to just keep it in mind. Now, we have to go to the audio panel next, and we have, as we see here, 8 channel mapped to 8 mono. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to channel configuration. We're going to change this to 8 channels. You can keep the sample size at 16-bit, even if it was 24. That part's not super important because unless you're for some reason using the onboard audio, you might want to change it back to 24. But typically, I just keep at 16 and things turn out fine. Now, we're pretty much done here because everything, like I said, is going to be good to go when these are checked off. But what we want to now probably make sure we do is we want to save this for future use. So I'm going to go to a save preset. And I'm just going to make it, I'm going to name it the same thing as the source. So 4096, 2160, 8 channel, Cineform. So basically, this is just the source resolution, the number of channels, and Cineform. And you know what? I'm going to actually just add an upper dash here to show that it's going to 2048 by 1080. So it's showing that it's going from the source to the new size, how many channels of audio, and the codec that I'm using. So now it's saved. And then you just click Q. It's going to queue up all that stuff. It's going to go into Media Encoder, which I already have open here. And it automatically brought in all this stuff. So now all we got to do is get this going to the proper folder. So select all your files, click here under output file on the blue, and we're just going to bring this along to a proper path. So I'm going to bring this over to basically the exact same place that the original footage is in. So I have my tutorial here, I have my original footage, and now I'm going to create a new folder called proxies. Enter into that. And whatever structure I had in the last one, which was basically tutorials, footage, and then A cam, B cam, C cam, I want to do the exact same here. So starting from footage, we have proxies, A cam, select folder. So you want to make sure it mirrors as closely as possible to the original. Now, when you have certain higher end cameras, they'll create something like DCIM, clip, and they'll have all these extra subfolders. You really just need it from the base of like the A cam, the B cam, basically the root of the cart. You'll need to go through all that extra stuff. Now we just basically need to repeat the steps for the other one in the A cam, which is this one 3840 by 2160. Again, we're just going to queue it up. We're going to select the video codec again to GoPro Cineform. We're going to do match source. We're going to uncheck it though and change the underscore to 1080. It's going to change it to 1920 for us because this is a 16:9 resolution. Got all this matched. And for the audio, again, we're just going to double check that. This is stereo. So I'm going to go to audio. Going to change it to stereo and not 2-channel mono because that, again, is something different. And then we're just going to go to transcoding, proxies, A cam. And again, goes into this folder. Cool. Let's move on to the B cam. This is all pretty standard stuff. This again is just 1920 footage, but it's MXF, so they're a little hard to edit with. So I'm just going to change these to GoPro so that they're a little easier to edit with. Going to match the source for everything because it's already 1920. Just going to change the audio and make sure that it's stereo. That's good. Click Q. And then we're going to select all those. We want to make sure we're only getting the ones we haven't done yet. Only the ones for the B cam. Going to select where they're going to go. Proxies, B cam. Select folder. Same thing for this, the C cam again. Video, just going to match the source since this is already 1920. Queue it up. Select all these and put them into a C cam. Cool. Okay, now let's talk about transcoding for cameras that shoot H.264 because you may want to take a slightly different approach for this. So if you guys are shooting with something that's like on a DSLR camera like the A7S, which shoots to a highly compressed H.264 codec, these codecs are great for saving space, but they're terrible for color grading and they're really bad for editing. So if you have a machine that can handle editing 4K ProRes and you have the space, I'd highly recommend just transcoding H.264 project to a native resolution ProRes 422 HQ file. This way you can just transcode, you can edit with those transcodes, and then you can color with them without having to relink to the original files. The ProRes 422 HQ files will actually be equal quality to the originals, or technically they'll sort of be higher. You can actually stretch them a little bit more. I'm not saying it's going to work magic, but you can stretch them a little more in the color grade. So it's up to you. 4K of any kind can be a bit tough on any machine, but can save you a lot of time in the long run if your machine can handle it. The only thing different you're going to have to do is match the source completely to the original instead of scaling the size down, basically. So you just do match source and make sure the audio is matched properly, and then you're good to go. So basically, after you're all done with this, you would basically just go to the start, and you would click Start Queue. Starts transcoding things, and you're good to go. So stay tuned, guys, for episode 2, where we're going to go over the Premiere proxy system that I think started in CC 2017. And we're going to sort of talk about that version of transcoding versus the one we just did. So this was a bit of a long one, guys, but the future ones are actually going to be pretty short because a lot of the process is repeated. So thanks for hanging in there. I'm going to go get some water because my mouth is dry as hell. So thanks, guys. Stay tuned.